a monetization on your game standpoint, we've got in-app purchases, we've got traditional game advertising, and then we also have the ability to monetize by connecting with brands to actually build some marketing within the game, which our next speaker will be talking about. Let's give a round of applause to Robby Young, CEO of Animoca.
Thank you, everybody. Good morning. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to have their coffee already. I'm here to talk a little bit about brands and mobile gaming. It is a focus and a specialty for us, as you can tell. We put it in our name, so it's a very serious strategy for us and something we think about quite a lot. And when I talk about brands in mobile gaming, obviously there are a couple of different ways in which we can think about brands. But specifically, I'm talking about leveraging existing brands in mobile games to create new games from existing brands, as opposed to trying to build a brand based on a successful game, sort of the Angry Birds model, if you will. So to move on and talk a little bit about, let me see, I will use this one here. Talk about ourselves a little bit. We are a Hong Kong-based global publisher and developer. So we have kind of two sides of the house. On the one hand, we create original games based on licensed intellectual property. So IP you may know, like Garfield, Doraemon, Astro Boy, Ultraman, etc. And we create original games using these characters, and we license these characters from the brand owners. And on the other side of the house, we have a publishing business. And the publishing business tends to take a more traditional form in which we work with local developers and help them often to distribute and market and localize their games around the world. For the publishing business, it tends to be what I would call cross-border. So for the most part, we're working with Asian developers, helping them to go to Western markets, and Western developers who want to go to Asian markets. That tends to be most of the business there. And we're based in Hong Kong, and most of our resources headcount is in Hong Kong. But in terms of operations and business, we actually do roughly half of our business in North America and Western Europe, and about half of our business in Asia. So we're reasonably well distributed around the world. So why brands? Why brands? You know, I think obviously, as I mentioned, there is of course the strategy of building a brand of your own. So building that Angry Birds, Crossy Road, Clash of Clans, etc. Brands that we come to know and love as mobile games, and they've created wonderful brand franchises for themselves based on the success of their mobile games. But in this case, I want to talk about why you would think to use an existing brand in your mobile game. And I think top of mind in the last year is Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian Hollywood is a fantastic example of, I think, you know, sort of industry best practices for the kind of success that you can achieve leveraging an existing brand in a mobile game. And by success here, I'm defining it very simply. If you take a look at the revenues over the course of last year and this year, I mean, $70 million last year, $20 million in the first quarter of this year, it's a clear winner from Glue. This is a mega hit game. But I think most importantly, when we think about why use a brand in a mobile game like this, we have to kind of think of, okay, so here they've leveraged Kim Kardashian's celebrity and name recognition within the game itself, but what would have happened if they didn't have Kim Kardashian? And thankfully, Glue has the perfect case study for us with this, because originally they had a game called Stardom Hollywood. And Stardom Hollywood was a very successful title. They created it in their studio in Toronto and was successful on both Apple and Google Play for a long time. But I think if you take a look at the difference, one thing that's important when you think about the Kim Kardashian game is that, in fact, Kim Kardashian Hollywood was based on the original Stardom Hollywood game engine and gameplay style. It's a female RPG focused on celebrity. But I think the team at Glue very smartly thought, how do we take Stardom Hollywood and expand on what we've built already, because we know we have engaging gameplay and we want to bring it to a new audience and we want to take it to the next level, but how do we do that? And so in this case, they hit upon the strategy of collaborating with Kim Kardashian in this case to leverage her celebrity and her fan base to bring that game to a new audience. And you can see obviously the results were very dramatic. Much higher rate of featuring in the iTunes store, which is much higher grossing in terms of revenues, number of countries, etc. I mean, there's really no comparison. And Stardom Hollywood was a very successful title. I mean, $500,000 in revenues a month is nothing to sneeze at. That's a very, very good title. But obviously, a huge slam dunk with Kim Kardashian at $12 million a month in revenue. So I'm not saying that this is just due to the brand, but it has a lot to do with the brand. So on the back of that, Glue then announced collaborations with Katy Perry and Britney Spears for precisely, I believe, the same strategic effect. Okay, and I'm actually picking on Glue specifically just because I think they're actually a well-known public role model, I think, in terms of celebrity branding now. And it's interesting to see that a company like Glue, which has been around for quite a while and was best known for male-oriented titles like Deer Hunter, for example, now actually makes most of its revenues from female-oriented titles. So celebrity titles like Kim Kardashian Hollywood and Diner Dash and that series. So I think they've made a fantastic pivot towards a different audience that they weren't reaching previously with a lot of the male-oriented games. And working with celebrities has allowed them to engage new and different audiences. And I think ultimately that's what it's all about. Because if you think about the ecosystem of how you promote and get your game discovered, there are a whole variety of channels out there. Obviously, you've got social, you've got web video, you have App Store featuring and organic search traffic within the app stores. And when you think about how to leverage all of these channels, obviously, you can do paid marketing, right? You can do CPI-based campaigns. There are any number of great user acquisition networks you can work with to push your app into people's hands. But if you think about leveraging a brand, so in this case, I go back to the Kim Kardashian example, or in fact, any brand. You know, if you look at our portfolio, Garfield, Doraemon, Astro Boy, all of these brands have social media followers, number one. They have YouTube channels where people are watching existing video content based on those brands. And they also often get selected for featuring by the app stores because these are brands that are globally recognized and loved. And the app store editors understand that these may have interest to their existing audience. But I think if you look back at the Kim Kardashian example, social media, I mean, one of the things that clearly Kim Kardashian, Katy Perry, and Britney Spears all have in common are vast numbers of social media followers. And so in building that partnership between the celebrity in this case and the app developer, a lot of it is about that promotional capability, how to leverage those social channels basically to push app installs. So I think that another way to look at the partnership between the brand and the app developer is that it's a lot about discovery and user acquisition, because I think that's one of the primary motivators of working with a brand. So to highlight here, discovery we know has become much more difficult over the years because of the huge number of apps that have been launched in the app stores. So amongst 1.4 million apps in either Google Play or the iTunes App Store, it's very difficult to get your app discovered. And so we all appeal to different kinds of social media and user acquisition networks to try to improve discovery. But one of the problems with that is that the cost of user acquisition continues to grow. So we're also searching for methods for which we can improve our discoverability and yet manage those increasing user acquisition costs, because we all have limited budgets. So I think that brands are a great resource in order to do that. And one of the reasons is fan targeting, because existing brands have user bases and fan bases all of their own, and you can leverage those existing fan bases as a sort of seeding network from which to grow organically the traffic within your game. So I give you a perfect example. We launched an app in February featuring the character Doraemon, the Japanese anime cat. He's well known and beloved throughout the Asian region after 30 years of anime and TV series and etc. Now, we launched this app focusing initially on the Asian market, but it was a global launch, and it got a lot of traffic. And you would expect that because it's Doraemon and he has an existing fan base, people my age grew up on Doraemon, kids nowadays are also watching Doraemon. So naturally you would expect Japan, Korea, China, there is reasonable take-up because he's a highly recognized character. But I think importantly, going beyond that core North Asian market, we also found very strong take-up in Southeast Asia, where again, Doraemon is a well-known and recognized character. But beyond that, South Asia, so India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, huge following for Doraemon, okay? Which was originally, when we licensed Doraemon, was a surprise to me because I wasn't so aware that, in fact, Doraemon as a television character is widely followed in South Asia. The same is true for Spanish-speaking markets. So Spain, Latin America also actually have large pockets of fans of Doraemon. So in our case, I think one of the things that we enjoy about our partnership with that particular brand is Doraemon allows us to permeate lots of different geographic territories because there are existing fan bases there. And those existing fan bases essentially mean organic installations. And that's very important, as we all know, to reducing our overall cost of marketing and making our marketing much more effective. Because those fan bases may not be sort of the sum total of the people who will ultimately be the players in our games, but it's a great place to start, and it's a great place where you can get loyal users to balance paid marketing initiatives. Okay? And the last thing I'll point to here on the slide is credibility. So credibility from the standpoint that if a consumer is faced between a choice of a branded product and a non-branded product, typically the branded product will always win out. So in an industry where there are so many variables between the initial promotion and the consumer actually downloading and playing our app, all of these factors, file size, device compatibility, billing methods, etc. But amongst all those variables, one of them, of course, is credibility. And so given a choice between very similar looking titles, branded and not, we believe the branded titles will win out in terms of consumer choice. So that's important. Now, I wanted to take a quick look at the App Store. I try to look at this from time to time just to sort of see what the impact of branding is on titles that are sort of being ranked amongst the top grossing apps. So this is the US iTunes Store last week in terms of the top grossing charts. So the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to focus on non-casino games. So I got rid of the social casino titles. So I have to first give a shout out to the social casino industry because clearly they're having a good effect on the top grossing charts. So that leaves us with about half of the apps left. Now, when I look at what remains sort of apart from social casino, I notice that there are a number of titles out there that are leveraging existing brands. And when I say existing brands, obviously Marvel, Madden, The Simpsons, but I include The Sims and Minecraft in there because those are brands that were actually built on non-mobile platforms, and they leveraged that existing audience from PC-based games or console games to the mobile platform. So all of these apps are actually leveraging brands that existed somewhere besides mobile to build a mobile audience. And I'll add two more to that, actually, from the social casino business. I'll bring back Dorothy there from the Wizard of Oz, so Zynga's slot game and the World Series of Poker on the bottom, just because although they're social casino apps, they're clearly leveraging a brand from a non-mobile platform to enhance discoverability of their mobile game. Like in the case of number 11 there, with Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz, if I uncovered the rest of those, of the top 20 apps, there are probably 5 or 6 that are all slot social casino apps. So clearly product differentiation amongst slot apps has a lot to do with branding and user interface because gameplay, is largely similar amongst a similar genre of gameplay styles. So this gives you an idea that brands are clearly having an impact on what is being played in the top grossing charts in the iTunes store today. So lastly, I think I just want to leave you with a few words of advice about working with brands. So how do I get a brand? First, you have to have a great idea. That's where it all starts. You have to have a great game concept. You have to have an understanding in order to make that sales pitch to the brand owner. Why should they license you their brand? Because there are plenty of game companies out there, and you need to be offering something reasonably unique to them in terms of a proposition of what is it that you want to build? What is your vision for the game? And then beyond that, what is your vision for all of the mechanics and the nuts and bolts? Geographic territories, user acquisition, etc. Why are you going to be able to faithfully bring their game bring their brand rather onto the mobile platform and do them justice? Very important. You have to build a relationship of trust. I think in this industry, it's very important to keep in mind that when you work with a lot of these very well-known brand owners, they've been building brand equity in their brands for decades, very likely. So, characters that we use like Doraemon and Garfield, Astro Boy, Ultraman, these are all 30-year plus characters, and they've been spending their careers building brand equity for those brands. So what that means is when we translate those brands into mobile games, their primary concern as a licensor is that we do justice to the brand, that we don't spoil or tarnish any of the existing brand equity. They're more concerned about that than actually what we believe the revenue potential that we could offer them is. So we need to build that trust with them that we are going to be a faithful steward of their brand, and that's absolutely number one, more important than anything else. So I think you will find that there are cases of companies who try to license brands based on financial commitment or marketing muscle, and I think that we see sometimes they're unsuccessful in being able to license brands because from the licensor's perspective, it's about trust of faith to the brand, not how many revenues are you going to deliver me. So I think staying true to the brand is very important. Another thing to think about is how do you represent the brand's values through your gameplay and your game style? So you need to stay true to what are the sort of primary components of the brand. Think about your game content, the storyline in your game. How does that relate to the brand? Does it give the fans, the hardcore fans, what they're looking for? So for example, in this picture I used Garfield. We've created a number of successful Garfield games around food, because clearly he's a fat, lazy cat, and food is what he's about. So we created a series of successful time management games around diner and restaurant themes. Garfield's Diner, a very popular game because clearly fans associate Garfield with eating. But we had another concept. We thought, what about using a tower defense engine? People love tower defense, and we think that we could get Garfield fans interested in playing tower defense games if only we can figure out a way to put Garfield and tower defense together. But those are two things that normally you might not associate together. In this case, we used a tower defense engine to create Garfield's Defense, and it was a game based on the concept that Garfield's defending the refrigerator against food invaders who want to steal his food. Okay? So we created a storyline that stayed true to the brand, but in so doing then allows us to basically use that brand audience to build a fan base for the gameplay style that normally, they wouldn't be going and downloading tower defense games based on King Arthur themes or Three Kingdoms themes, for example. So I think it's important to stay true to those brand values, but not to be concerned that you can't still be creative, because you just have to figure out how to represent the brand values within the gameplay style that you're trying to achieve. And most important, remember that it's a partnership. So you and the brand owner, the licensor, are building a partnership. I think from a sort of financial point of view, one of the things that's nice about that partnership with a brand is that you share an investment in the business, because often you have a royalty payment that you're making, so a revenue share relationship with the brand licensor, and that revenue share relationship means you're sharing the risk as well as the reward. So you're both co-investing in the game. And that's important to remember because as you go along, you need to involve the brand licensor at every step of the way when it comes to approval of artwork, approval of storyboard concepts, approval of distribution strategies, etc. And it sometimes can be challenging for development teams to collaborate with people outside of their organization who have a material say in what goes into the final product, because they have to understand that the brand licensor, it's their brand. So at the end of the day, no matter how hard you've worked and how many hours you've spent working on a particular game, if they say that you're not representing the brand appropriately, they do have a veto right on the final product. So you need to work in partnership with them all along the way. And hence my last point, which is be patient, because it is a partnership. So with that, I've closed my presentation, and if anybody has any questions, please let me know.
Questions from the audience?
Hi. Hi, Robby. I have two questions. What are the costs involved in licensing a brand? And in your experience, has there been failures involved with licensing a brand?
Okay, so 2 questions. Costs involved in licensing, and have there been failures? So costs in licensing, typically licensing arrangements are based on a royalty. So there will be some type of royalty calculation based on the revenues generated in the game, and that royalty will be paid to the licensor. So for example, after you take away platform fees, the remaining, let's use Google and Apple as an example, 70% of revenue, there would be a percentage of that that would be shared with the licensor, and that's the royalty rate. And those rates vary by individual license agreement, but typically they fall along the lines of, anywhere from 20 to 40%, 20 to 50%, depending on the brand probably. And that's a typical royalty rate. Now, often, depending on the brand, there may be some upfront advance on royalties requested by the licensor, which is cash upfront to pay to them. But in most cases, that's not just a cash fee, but it's actually an advance on future royalties. So it's showing the brand licensor that you have a financial commitment and skin in the game, basically that you believe in the story that you're pitching to them. So that's typically how the commercial arrangements would work. In terms of success versus failure, yes. I mean, just using a brand in your app does not guarantee success in gaming or in the App Store at all. It still comes down to whether or not your game is, is enjoyable to play by consumers, whether it monetizes well, et cetera, et cetera. I think our focus, the focus of what I was talking about in terms of branding, is how to leverage brands to increase discoverability and increase distribution of your game so that it gets into the widest possible number of users. And particularly when you leverage those fan communities of brands, you're getting it into, users who are more likely to enjoy your game than just somebody who randomly walked in from the street, so to speak. So I think it's more about getting the game into as many hands at a reasonable cost as you can, but then it's up to the game to perform after that. And if the game doesn't perform, then there's nothing you can do about that.
Any other questions? I've got one question. Is there any particular event or place you would go to reach out to meet people that might be interested in licensing their IP for a game?
Yes. So there is actually a very well-entrenched licensing industry, licensing conventions and trade shows, because the licensing industry has long been raised on consumer products, so plush toys, etc., consumer durables, as well as things like magazines, television shows, etc. So there's a very well-established licensing industry, and I find that these days mobile games and games who want to use licenses often become a complement. So you see a lot of game developers now attending licensing shows in order to go and get introduced to people who are interested in licensing.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Robby. Let's give him another round of applause.
Everyone.